There is a book, older than ink, older than stone, older than the idea of God. It has no title, no spine, no weight. Because it was never made, it was remembered. It does not live in libraries, nor behind golden altars. It lives in the silence between things, in the space before a thought becomes a word, in the breath before the mouth speaks the first syllable. This book is not written, it is woven. Woven into the very structure of reality. A pattern beneath patterns, a rhythm beneath all movement, a resonance you can't quite hear, but which the bones of the earth and the blood of your ancestors never stopped singing. It has no pages, but it has layers, each one thinner than the last, until they disappear into pure meaning. It does not use letters, it uses form. Circles, spirals, lines that loop back into themselves, like breath returning to breath. The book speaks in geometry, in symmetry, in vibration, not in telling, in reminding. Because everything you read in it, you already knew. Some call it the original scripture, others the hidden record, the Akashic field, the whispering pattern, the book of the first light. But it needs no name, because it exists beyond what names can hold. It was never meant to be taught, only remembered, only touched. And long before the temples were built, before gods were sculpted in stone and laws etched into tablets, there were those who could read it, not with their eyes, not with language, but with presence. They stood at the edge of rivers, beneath stars, inside the womb of caves, and the book unfolded itself to them. Not in sentences, but in visions, in harmonies, in pulses of knowing that struck the soul like a bell. They did not call it truth, they called it home. Because when the book spoke, they did not feel enlightened, they felt returned. And they carried it, not in scrolls, not in stone, but in their movements, in their rituals, in the way they touched the earth and each other and the sky. The book was not a doctrine, it was a field. And every soul, in every time, had the capacity to step into it if they became quiet enough to feel its rhythm. But over time, we grew louder. We demanded answers, definitions, certainty. And so the book grew dim. Not gone, just ignored. Covered by layers of dogma, fear, translation. But still there, still humming, still offering. Not its words, its pattern. Because the true book, the one that predates every god, every myth, every throne and altar and sacred vow, does not speak to belief. It speaks to remembrance. And when you hear it, you don't understand it. You recognize it. Like a song you forgot you knew, like a place you've never been, but somehow remember. And then, only then, do you realize the book was never outside of you. It lives where you are most quiet, where you are most still, where the mind ends and the soul begins. There was a time, not in history, but in memory, when the world did not yet speak in words, when there were no names for the stars, no doctrines about the sky, no stories to prove or protect, only direct knowing. Not truth in the way we mean it now, not an idea you must believe or defend, but truth as presence, as resonance. The same way a tree bends with the wind without needing to be taught what the wind is. The same way a child feels warmth and reaches toward it before ever knowing the word sun. In that world there were no priests, because there was no separation between the sacred and the world. Every river was a teacher, every shadow had meaning, every breath was part, of the great unfolding. And yet, there was no religion, no systems, no hierarchies, no holy books wrapped in chains, because there was no need to believe what you could already feel. This was the age before belief, before the mind wrapped the sacred in symbols too small to hold its depth, before the eternal was locked into names and forms and statues that no longer moved. In that age, the book we spoke of in the first chapter was not hidden. It was in the open air. It shimmered in the arrangement of leaves, in the silence between birdsong, in the pattern of firelight dancing on the stone walls of caves. People didn't read it, they lived inside it. They didn't call it divine. They called it the way things are, because it didn't come from above. It was above and below and within. It whispered through intuition. It pulsed through rhythm. It showed itself in dreams that didn't need interpretation because the dreamer already knew. There were no commandments, only reminders. No saviors, only those who had walked far enough into themselves to bring back echoes of that remembering. They spoke little, because in that time, words still carried weight, still moved things. And when they were spoken, it was not to explain, but to awaken. There were no sermons, only stories, not to control, but to open doors inside the listener. They did not call it spirituality. They didn't need to. There was no split yet between sacred and secular, between soul and soil. Everything was woven. But slowly, that weaving began to fray. People forgot. They began to seek the sacred outside themselves, in others, in idols, in written laws. And in that seeking, they left behind what had always been within. The truth didn't leave, but the remembering did. And so the age of words began, and with it, the age of belief. And belief, while powerful, is not the same as knowing. It is a bridge built after the river has already been crossed. And the book, that original vibration, that pure presence, was slowly buried. Not lost, not destroyed, just hidden behind the noise of our own forgetting. But even now, in stillness, you can feel it. The soft echo of the time before time. The voice that says, "You knew me before you learned to speak." As the world changed, as the first temples rose from soil, as belief hardened into law, and words replaced resonance, the book faded from view, but not from existence, because it cannot be erased. It is not a thing, it is a field, a memory woven into the fabric of being. And in every age, in every culture, in every collapsing and rebirthing civilization, there have been a few who still heard it, not with their ears, with their essence. They were not always wise, not always kind, not always followed, but they carried something that did not come from this world, though it lived inside it. They were known by many names. In some traditions, the seed bearers, the path holders, the walkers between. In others, fools, outcasts, madmen, witches, called strange because they remembered things that hadn't been taught in 1,000 years. They did not preach, they reminded. And they reminded not with explanation, but with presence. They spoke in ways that bent logic. Their stories seemed like riddles, their symbols too simple. But when they moved, the book moved with them. Sometimes they sang, and the song shifted the space around them. Sometimes they touched the earth, and it remembered its shape. Sometimes they said nothing, and yet everyone felt something ancient stir. These were not founders of religion. They were preservers of rhythm. They guarded the memory of how things felt before we tried to name them. They knew you cannot teach the book, you can only become its echo. And so they lived quietly, dangerously, sacredly. They hid their knowledge in stories passed as lullabies, in patterns of weaving, in dances no longer understood. They buried fragments of the book in art, in gesture, in silence. Sometimes they were hunted, not because they threatened power, but because they disrupted forgetting. They didn't build temples, they walked past them. They didn't write scripture, they breathed it. And though they are mostly forgotten now, their presence remains. In symbols we still draw, without knowing why. In dreams that come to children before they learn the names of things. In the strange familiarity we feel when we stand under stars and sense something watching us that is not separate. It is because of them that the book is still here, not preserved in archives, but braided into the soul of every human being, waiting. And from time to time, someone will begin to feel it again. The pulse, the shape behind sound, the silence behind symbols. And that someone will not know why, but they will start to listen. And that will be the book opening again. The great misunderstanding was thinking the book could be written down, that its essence could be captured in letters, in language, in lines. But what was truly recorded was never meant for the eye. It was meant for the soul. The book does not speak, it resonates. And what it says is not instruction, but pattern. It speaks in the form of spiral galaxies and sunflower seeds. It speaks in the way water curls, as it moves downstream, in the rhythm of breath, in the architecture of silence. This is not metaphor, this is design. It speaks through geometry. The circle unity, return, the eternal, the triangle balance, fire, the meeting point of realms, the square structure, manifestation, matter. These were never decorations. They were sentences in the ancient language of form. It speaks through frequency, the tones that make water dance into shapes, the hum of certain spaces that calms the body before the mind understands. Chants, drones, gongs, these are not cultural, they are keys. Every vibration is a word, every harmony a paragraph, every silence a space between knowing. The book is also written in symbols, not invented, discovered. The serpent coiled or rising, the eye open or veiled, the tree with roots and branches mirroring each other across the axis of worlds. They were not religious at first. They were maps, tools, reminders of how consciousness unfolds itself into matter and returns again. You've seen these symbols in temples, in dreams, in the margins of books you don't remember choosing. They echo because they are written not on the page, but in the architecture of being. They are the way reality reminds itself how to stay whole. But over time, we stopped reading them. We made them sacred. Then we made them forbidden. Then we made them meaningless. But they never stopped working. Because a symbol does not require your belief. It functions beneath it. And somewhere inside you, you are still reading. When you stare too long at fire, when a pattern on a wall makes you pause without knowing why, when a sound hits your chest instead of your ears, that is the book, still speaking, still active. It was never about information. It was about alignment. To live in tune with it, is to remember who you are without needing to explain it. To forget it is to feel the ache of being out of rhythm with your own source. And yet the book is patient. It waits in stone, in breath, in the soft geometry of sleep. It was never lost, just unnoticed, because what was really written was never ink. It was truth, layered into time, folded into form, and waiting to be read again by anyone willing to feel instead of interpret. No book stays whole when power begins to circle it. And the original book, the one without pages or ink, the one written in light, form, and vibration, was never meant to be owned. But when people forgot how to read it with their soul, they began to translate it. Not with reverence, with ambition. They took fragments, symbols, patterns, echoes of the sacred rhythm, and broke them into pieces. Some wrapped them in myth, others buried them in law, a few turned them into weapons. And what was once a song became 1,000 competing voices. They wrote it into scriptures, wrote it into commandments, wrote it into stories of chosen tribes, of fallen angels, of punishments and heavens and forbidden fruits. Each fragment carried some truth, but no fragment was the truth. Because truth cannot be owned, only mirrored. And so the fragmentation began. One piece became a religion, another a philosophy, another a secret society, another a suppressed cult lost to time and ashes. And people fought not for the book itself, but for their corner of it. They killed in the name of their shard of light. They ruled over others with one page of the original script pressed against their chest like proof. And yet, in every temple, in every sacred tradition, there remained echoes. A geometric pattern in a cathedral ceiling that matched one in a Sumerian tablet. A ritual gesture found both in ancient Africa and far-off Oceania. A chant nearly identical, sung in 3 tongues by people who had never met. Coincidence? Or fragments resonating from a shared origin? The book had been broken, but not lost, because vibration cannot be destroyed, only misunderstood. And in every religion, every belief system, every sacred tradition, there are those who begin to feel it again. The hum beneath the words, the tone beneath the teaching. And those few, they begin to see the whole again. Not by rejecting the fragment, but by recognizing the light it still carries. They don't destroy temples. They sit in them with new eyes. They don't burn books. They read between their lines. Because they understand all of it came from one fire, one rhythm, one book. And it is still alive. In pieces, yes, but like scattered seeds. Waiting, not for scholars, but for rememberers. Those who can feel truth, not just when it is spoken, but when it is hidden. And if you listen closely, you can hear it now. Between the chants, beneath the texts, in the quiet space that lives inside every question. It says, I am not what you think, I am what you've always felt. You weren't meant to worship the book, you were meant to become it. Because the most sacred text was not written on stone or parchment or gold. It was written in you. Before you had a name, before you learned to speak, before the world told you who you were supposed to be, you came here, not as an empty vessel to be filled with belief, but as a carrier of something already whole. A vibration, a memory, a signature woven from the same field that birthed stars. The book speaks to that part of you, not the mind, not the ego, not even the heart. It speaks to the spark. And what it says is not commandment, it is recognition. It tells you, you are not broken, you are not behind, you are not a mistake trying to earn your way back into the light. You are the light forgetting itself temporarily. You are the page trying to remember it was never separate from the whole. And every ache, every longing, every strange sense that you are more than what the world sees, that is the book trying to open again inside you. You've always known this. In moments of stillness, in the way you respond to beauty you can't explain, in the feeling that your life has meaning even when you can't name it. The book reminds you, you are not your thoughts, you are the space between them. You are not your past, you are the one who watched it unfold. You carry not only the memory of who you've been, but the blueprint of what you still are beneath the forgetting. And when you align with that blueprint, you don't become divine. You remember you already were. This is what the book says. Not in a single sentence, not in a verse, but in the language of presence. It shows itself when you forgive without knowing why, you create without needing praise, you love without fear of return. Those are the chapters, those are the pages, those are the holy verses no one can burn, because they are lived, not taught. And here is the secret. The book was never about God. It was never about obedience. It was about remembrance of the part of you that cannot die, cannot be diminished, and cannot be bought or sold. The part that exists before you were born and after you are gone. The part that is still reading itself. The book was never destroyed. It was buried. Not by time, by intention. Because something happened when humanity began to organize belief, when truth became a tool, not for liberation, but for control. The book was too pure, too direct, too powerful. It did not require temples, did not demand intermediaries, did not submit to thrones or priesthoods. It whispered, "You are enough. You already hold the pattern. You do not need to be ruled." And that was unacceptable to those who built systems on hierarchy, obedience, and fear. So the book was covered, layer by layer, first with interpretation, then with doctrine, then with fear. Don't read that. Don't feel that. Don't trust that voice inside you. They called it dangerous, blasphemous, madness. And in a way, they were right. Because to truly read the book is to dismantle everything that was built to replace it. It unravels the idea that someone else holds the key to your soul. It dissolves the illusion that salvation comes from outside. It reveals that divinity is not at the top of a system, but at the center of you. And so the book had to be hidden, but not erased, because it cannot be. Instead, it was encoded, folded into myths, buried in symbols, scattered in forgotten rituals and the dreams of children. It was placed in stories, so old and strange they would be mistaken for fantasy. It was placed where no authority would think to look, in stillness, in intuition, in the sacred act of being fully human. The book waits, and every so often, someone rediscovers a piece. They begin to feel a deep resonance with forgotten things. Ancient ideas come alive again in their art, their music, their silence. And the systems begin to tremble, because remembering is the most radical act in a world built on forgetting. You were not meant to obey the book. You were meant to embody it. But to do that, you must step outside the narratives written for you. You must stop asking permission to know what your soul already carries. This is why it was hidden, not to punish you, to protect it. Because the book knew there would come a time when the world would grow quiet again, when noise would become unbearable, when people would start to feel that something sacred had been stolen. And in that hunger, the book would begin to shine through, not in temples, not in texts, in you. You cannot read this book the way you read others. It has no spine, no title, no translation. It does not sit on a shelf. It waits in the quiet place beneath your thoughts. It is not opened with hands. It is opened with attention. You do not study it. You remember it. And the first step is stillness. Because the book speaks in frequencies too soft for a noisy mind. When you sit with yourself, not to fix, not to seek, but to simply be, you begin to hear it. Not a voice, a tone. A subtle pulse, like the hum of stars, beneath the silence of your breath. At first, it feels like memory. Then it feels like truth. Then you realize it's you. You are not the reader of the book. You are the page. And life is the ink that moves across you. Each moment, a letter. Each choice, a symbol. Each breath, a turning of the sacred. The book reveals itself in ordinary things. The way the wind stops right before revelation. The way your chest tightens when you see a face you've known across lifetimes. The way light falls through branches, just so, and something deep inside you says, I've seen this before. These are not accidents. They are echoes of the pattern you once knew. The book lives in pattern, in rhythm, in reminders. And to read it again is to become humble enough to listen without trying to interpret. It is not about knowledge. It is about reconnection with the deeper you, the one beneath belief, the one beneath identity, the one that never stopped holding the thread. When you are honest, quiet, and ready, the book begins to respond. Not with answers, with alignment. You meet the right people. You find the right silence. The symbols begin to return in dreams, in art, in sudden insights that feel too old to be new. And you begin to live from that place again. Not perfect, but aware. Not enlightened, but remembering. And as you remember, you become a mirror. Others begin to feel the book through you. Not because you teach it, but because you are it. And that, perhaps, is the final truth. The book predates all religions, but it does not reject them. It waits behind them, beneath them, inside you. And when the time is right, it opens, and you realize it was never lost, only waiting for you to become still enough to read it.